This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.
Welcome to this edition of PHRC Speaks, Fair Housing in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Adrian Garcia, Director of Enforcement for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Today on PHRC Speaks, we once again speak through the voice of one of our newest team members. Specifically, we will be discussing her experience working with individuals with intellectual disabilities and how issues of disparate impacts continues to contribute to their isolation, inequitable access to opportunity to housing. According to a 2011 study done by the World Health Organization and World Bank Group, people with disabilities are more likely to live in poverty, have poor quality of or insecure housing, low levels of workforce participation and education, and be socially excluded or marginalized. They may also face violence and discrimination related to their disabilities and have difficulty accessing appropriate health care. This was true before the pandemic. Imagine the effect post-pandemic. Caroline Eister serves as the Director of Fair Housing and Commercial Property at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. In this capacity, she leads the development, implementation, and monitoring of statewide programs aimed at preventing discrimination in housing and commercial property. Eister's journey began in public service at the Department of Human Services, where she held various roles in the Office of Developmental Programs, the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, and the Office of Administration's Bureau of Equal Opportunity. Throughout her career, Eister has dedicated many years to supporting people with disabilities and the elderly through trainings, advocacy, healthcare provision, and investigation. Eister previously served at the PHRC in the Harrisburg Regional Office as a human relations representative, and her return to PHRC reflects her ongoing dedication to advancing fair housing and advocating for the rights of all Pennsylvanians. Her personal passion for social justice provides support for positive change and empowerment in communities across the state. Director Eister, welcome to PHRC Speaks, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Director Garcia.
All right, so I always ask this from everyone that appears, because I'm interested, and I think that the audience is interested in knowing that the people that are in this type of work are in it because they view it as a calling. So the question is, tell me a little bit about your social justice journey. How did you get into this work?
For me, it started in my family. At the age of about 12 or 13, my father became disabled through an accident. The impact that had on my family, particularly my father, the social impact, how people treated him prior to his disability, after his disability, I saw the discrepancy, the impact it had as he rehabilitated on that front. The employment that was available to him, he worked in insurance prior to that. There wasn't equal employment for him post-disability. My mother worked in retail. My father, as I said, was in insurance. After the disability that my father incurred, my mother was thrust into a head of household situation, pregnant with her fourth child. And at that time, it was very difficult for her and for my siblings to, in so many ways, financially, the opportunities for my father were much less with his disability, although he was the same person. He had capabilities, all of his same capabilities, except he had a communication deficit. I knew when I was in trouble. My siblings, he was still our father. He was still a disciplinarian, but the way he communicated changed. And that was the only difference. And I could not understand how people had that different view of him at that time. So I think That's what fueled my social justice journey, having experienced that first time on those aspects in my family and wanting my father and others to be treated with dignity and respect.
Absolutely. And what's interesting about the way you're telling this story is that many times when people think about civil rights, when they think about social justice, it conjures up the same imagery that they've seen in the media. It conjures up the police, the protests, the dogs attacking people of color. That's what they think about. They end up thinking about those people, but they don't know that anyone can be a member of a protected class. And so thank you for sharing your story with us, but that's basically what you're illustrating, that once your father became disabled, he then was treated differently, even though he was still your father.
Right, and anyone's life can change on a dime.
That's right. So tell me about what attracted you to joining the PHRC. And part of that is also what drives your calling. You gave us a little bit of that, but what drives your professional calling in this direction?
In this direction, initially, well, prior to PHRC, as was mentioned in the introductions, I worked in the community in site-based service providers, serving people with intellectual disabilities. I had mostly in the training and outreach field in that capacity, but I did have the opportunity to do administrative and certified investigations during that time. That carried over when I came into Commonwealth service in the same capacity with the offices, Department of Human Service offices, where I held roles. When I came to PHRC initially, it was for when I first got there. I worked as an HRR at first in our Harrisburg regional office. And what I expanded on with the complexity of those investigations and the depth, the integrity, the attention to detail, was very, very, very proud to work there and saw in that passion that my background in disabilities, my experience, how I could be of service to other protected classes.
Right.
And what those protected classes were. And so I expanded professionally and I expanded personally, and it made my drive stronger.
Sure. Can I ask you, what did you like about the investigative portion of it?
I liked hearing people's stories. I liked putting a face to, as you said a few moments ago, what we think of when we think of civil rights. This put a very human face, and every face on it, frankly. Then with the investigative piece, I really loved, after hearing the stories, looking for the evidence.
Yeah.
You know, taking my time with that. I thought it was so interesting how things could take a hard turn. You know, hearing from the respondents and their view,
Sure.
their position on things.
Because there's always two sides to every story, isn't there?
Absolutely, and everyone's rights are important.
Yeah. So you've dedicated many years of your career supporting individuals with intellectual disabilities and the elderly. What can you share about the housing disparities that these two groups suffer?
In my view, I think some of the biggest problems facing people in those two particular protected classes, and there's overlap also in protected classes, and other classes, is availability, affordability. Notably, elderly people with disabilities are on fixed incomes. So the affordability of housing, the quality housing, if you have a disability or if accessibility is a problem.
Right.
The accommodations that need to be made, that have to be made, modifications. And, you know, protections. People in those classes may need certain protections.
Right. And you saw it firsthand when you talked about your father, how he was treated differently. And so if you could imagine people that are in disabilities, and even the elderly. And sometimes we don't think of the elderly as civil rights, but that is why here in the Commonwealth they protect age 40 and above.
Yes.
Because we understand that they can get mistreated. You said something very interesting, which was the fixed income. You went there first, and you then connected it to accessibility. And of course, you're talking about the pricing and the homes being out of reach. Am I right? Is that where you were going with that?
Yes, absolutely.
So there's a kind of a momentum across the Commonwealth where some municipalities are looking at trying to level the playing field for individuals that are in fixed income through legislative work on source of income, because people don't understand what is the commonality between the elderly and individuals with disability in terms of fixed income. What is it? Because obviously many of them can't work because of the disability. What have you seen in your experience, how they've been impacted by that fixed income in accessibility?
Where they would like to live, and what is when you're looking at a property that they can afford, what about the efficiency? How does that impact their utility bills? How safe is that place for them to live if they can afford it? How do they possibly have to make the choice between rent and basic needs, food?
Yeah. And you
Shelter,
see that in
yes.
both, yeah.
Yes.
So Pennsylvania is a diverse state, right? From large cities to small rural communities, and we often discuss the challenges facing residents in larger cities. But what are the barriers that you've seen in the rural communities?
Well, I'm from a rural community, so this is something I can speak on. And I would say in rural communities, the challenge is for people to access the resources they need to make complaints or to become educated more on what's provided, what's available in the Commonwealth. Transportation. There's a lack of public transportation in rural areas. Connectivity, I guess you would call it, technology. Not all of these rural communities have internet access, and that's a problem. Resources tend to be clustered around larger cities, more populated areas. So people in rural communities can lose out on those opportunities.
This is one that I hadn't planned on asking, but you kind of led me this way. I have often said, and I wonder if you agree, that by not having those systems, the internet, the transportation, the amenities, sidewalks, bus stops, by not having these things in rural communities, aren't we in fact segregating individuals with disability and even the elderly to living not where they choose to live, but where they have to live? What do you say?
I think it does come down to that. And by way of may not even be something that is intentionally thought about, but it is the impact of these circumstances in those environments. So then people are basically within those boundaries where it isn't the best place. They don't have the choices to live anywhere because of those factors.
And fair housing is about choice.
Right. It is. And people have the right to live wherever they want to. But how do we make that happen?
Which leads me to my next question. Now, in this role, fair housing, Director of Fair Housing Commercial Property, and with your experience and background of living in a rural community, understanding individuals with disability, understanding their barriers, what will be your strategy for reaching the rural communities?
At the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, we have a robust outreach program. Trainings are virtual. As we've mentioned, there are barriers sometimes for people in rural communities accessing those. So we also do on-site trainings. So our trainings are free. There's a myriad of fair housing topics that can be brought to the community. They could also be customized for the needs of the community. Mm-hmm. We have advisory boards in some communities, and my strategy would be to expand upon that. That is a liaison, basically, between the PHRC on a local level. I know that Coordinator Mellinger and you yourself, Director Garcia, have already started in your former position, having different ways for people in ways of people who may not do email or have those capabilities. Their elderly people do not do that, or maybe someone has a disability. So setting up post office boxes and meetings virtually and in person in these smaller communities, that would be a way to reach people in rural communities through education and then actionable steps.
And when we were preparing ourselves for our meeting today, or the show, you had mentioned domestic violence victims as a group that suffered some of that disparate treatment, some of the inequalities. Why do you believe that this group needs protection under the PHRA and under the Fair Housing Act?
Well, under those acts, if you think of, we know from statistics that victims of domestic violence are overwhelmingly female. I hate to think of any woman having to be fearful of losing her housing when she is in a crisis. There are policies of property managers and housing providers, ordinances may still be on the books, that have a disparate impact on a woman. Because if she calls law enforcement, she may be penalized in her housing or even lose her home. So she has to choose between protecting herself, her children, and having a place to live. Also, what I would hate to think of someone tied into a lease and their abuser has access to that property, knows how to get into that property, and they are, again, have to make the choice of breaking a lease and all the legal ramifications that would go with that, or their safety.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you this question. It's kind of an aspirational question, right? But some people say that discrimination and bigotry are learned behaviors. Now, if this is true, how do you think we would go or unlearn this behavior?
Unlearn, I like that term. Things are learned and unlearned. That if something can be learned, it can be learned. It can be unlearned. But my answer to that would be through connection. Connection is the key. Connection with other people. And being honest with yourself, with your own biases. If you are biased and you may have some of those beliefs, you probably learned them from someone you love. So looking at the evolution in our communities, the changing faces in our communities, getting out there, I'm taking the morals and values that we all learn and turning them outward in today's world through attending, getting involved, not just having those beliefs and values, getting involved, celebratory events that may happen in a community where everyone gets a voice. So I think we unlearn it by empathy and connection.
Yeah. Walking a mile in someone else's shoes is a good way to unlearn the bigotry, I think.
And as we said, anyone's life. We everyone may be sympathetic to these issues, but what we need to realize, we are one accident, we don't start a relationship thinking you'll ever have to leave with the clothes on your back with your children, realizing that we're all connected.
Yeah.
This is everyone's.
Well
These
said.
are everyone's issues.
Well said. So another aspirational question for you in this new role that you have. What is your vision for the Fair Housing and Commercial Property Division of the PHRC?
Oh, well, I am very fortunate to build upon the outstanding platform that you, Director Garcia, have built in the role that you held formerly. When I was talking about what drew me to PHRC, I spoke mainly about my position when I initially came to PHRC. Coming back in this role, I found through working at PHRC and the reputation, our recognized and respected executive director, the work that you've done at the PHRC and elsewhere, the bar of accountability that PHRC comfortably holds, the heavy bar, for those who would impede upon the rights, the very basic rights of the vulnerable. That is what makes me excited every day. That is my vision. That's to uphold, that's the bar where we already are. And for housing, you've made it very, coming into the position, as I said, there's so much that's been done, and that makes it easy for me to come in and, through my lens, shine on some of the classes that we've spoke about so far. I see us continuing on with our outreach, getting into even more communities. And my goal would be that every Pennsylvanian, when they find themselves in a position where they never thought they would be, or someone they love, knows what the resources are for Pennsylvanians, and that our legacy, right now our children, our grandchildren, that they have those resources and that they will take it even further in the hopes that one day there's no need for
work yourself out of a job, right?
That's right. There's no need for the. Right.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for taking time for coming here. I know that you're busy and you're still, managing everything, but I appreciate you being here and joining us on PHRC Speaks.
Well, I appreciate being here, and thank you for having me, Director Garcia.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure.
I also want to thank you, our viewers, for joining us today. You could have been anywhere else, but you chose to be here. So for more information on this topic, or if you believe that you've been a victim of discrimination in a housing transaction, visit us online at www.phrc.pa.gov or give us a call at 717-787-9780. We're also pretty easy to find online on Facebook, X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. That's going to do it for this edition of PHRC Speaks. Until next time, take care, be good, and be fair to each other.
This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.